All right, let's keep talking about World War I. Now, at this point in the war, we have declared war against Germany. We are in there. Now, we don't just automatically pop over to Europe and say, we're in it, we're fighting. There has to be some preparation. So, first things first, we've got to find out what we have as far as men, as far as equipment. We've got to get all that stuff on board. We've got to kind of sell the country on this idea of going to war. So, first things first, we kind of determine that we do not have enough people within our military. So we have to come up with a way to staff the military. We come up with this idea of a draft. So we draft people into the military, which helps our staffing problem. So that's first and foremost. Next is how to pay for this. So to pay for it, we do a couple different things. We do come up with the idea of an income tax. So we start taxing people's income. That was a pretty new idea. We sell war bonds, and they're sold as this way that when you're at home, you can help out. Like, you can contribute to the war effort, even though you're not over in Europe, by buying one of these war bonds. Now, we gave them cool, nifty names like Liberty Bonds and Victory Bonds to really make it seem like you're contributing. And then we made it so it was much, much easier to borrow money. So we do all of these things in order to kind of make that happen. The next problem is, how do we get enough stuff? We need to make sure that we have the means to go over there and fight. We need to have guns and equipment and all of those things. So we set up something called the War Industries Board that help us get our infrastructure ready to go fight this war. Remember, we're coming off the Industrial Revolution that happened late 1800s, early 1900s, so we are already heavily industrialized, lots of factories. And what the government does is they provide a lot of backing and a lot of incentives for private companies to switch over their mechanism to stop making what they're making. So if they're making radios, maybe to start producing machine guns, or if they're making some toys, I don't know, that they're going to start making bullets or tanks or whatever. So the government gets behind and they guarantee everybody's going to make a profit. And a lot of businesses do make a pretty tidy profit. They do pretty nice for themselves. So we do a really good job of changing over our industry very quickly, producing stuff very, very quickly, way faster than anybody thinks. We declare war in the spring of 1917. Europe does not think we're going to get over there nearly as quick as we do. It takes us about a year to organize and kind of actually start moving. So again, nobody thinks we're going to be that fast. We're very efficient. It worked pretty good. We also have to sell people, and we have to get around our natural resources. So we start to sell people on this idea of one of the ways you can contribute is not only by buying a bond, but by conserving what we have, whether it's food or it's our natural resources. So we have this idea of a limited consumption of things like gasoline and rubber, because we need them for production and our military efforts. We put out a lot of propaganda about, hey, what you can do is you can help conserve food. So let's have days, they call them meatless days, where it's like, let's try to eat meals that don't have meat in it so we can conserve meat for our nation's troops. Or, hey, like, so we can ship over all this food to Europe, why don't you guys grow what they called victory gardens? So again, they gave them a cool name, so everybody's like, hey, I got a victory garden. Let's grow victory gardens so you guys can take some of the burden off of America's farmers, and you can grow food for yourselves. That way you don't have to kind of buy it, and that's that much less we have to produce for the general population. So that kind of works pretty well. Again, the next thing we have to do is we have to find workers. There is a mass shortage, there's a big shortage of workers when all these younger men go over to Europe to fight, or they go to the military to train to go over to Europe to fight. So this does a couple things. This leads obviously a shortage, but it has some opportunities for groups. Women take the role of factory workers, immigrants, and African Americans all kind of get opportunities to work in factories. Now, this is big for not only World War I, but if AP were to ask you a question about like equality, this again is a nice step for those groups, where they're getting high-paying jobs in other parts of the country. So if you're an African American that was working on a small farm, going to work in a factory producing machine guns or bullets, all of a sudden, like, you're making a lot more money, or you're making more money, and that's moving them kind of towards middle class status. That is a pretty good gain, a pretty good push towards equality. Same thing for women. Again, they're working outside the house, and again, it's kind of showing everybody, like, hey, this is what we can do. That's a good thing. The other thing AP likes to talk about is moving people around. So even though this doesn't have as much to do with World War I, this is another another factor in people moving around. Like, African Americans went from largely living in the rural South to now all of a sudden they're moving to big cities, and big cities in the North. So again, it's spreading out the population, moving them from place to place. That is a pretty big thing. Okay, so that's a big deal. Other thing they had to do to actually get around, to actually get ready, is they had to sell the people on, this is going to be a long, drawn-out war. At least they thought it was. So if you're in a war for more than a couple, a lot of people have pretty short attention spans. So the government brought in, like, Hollywood producers and filmmakers to have, like, little propaganda pieces they'd play at, like, movie theaters, or posters they'd put out, or pamphlets they'd put out. Again, to keep selling people on, this is the right thing to do. So they put out posters kind of like this that basically depicts the Germans as this horrible, evil force that the United States is swooping in, and they're the heroes, and this is kind of setting us up to be, again, very, very heroic. Okay, now when we go to, let me move my face here. When we go to Europe to fight, we don't fight for very long. It isn't this, it isn't years and years and years. And a lot of what we kind of bop in like 1918, and we do a lot of fighting in France. In essence, we have a couple kind of big battles, and we push in France, and once we show up, and we win a couple battles, and we kind of fight in France, the Germans knew it was over. They knew they really didn't have much of a chance. So again, we don't have to sit there for, we don't have to fight for years and years and years. So our actual portion of the fighting, not terribly long. Okay, now once it's over, once the war is over, Woodrow Wilson has a role to play as a peace negotiator. He had written a piece known as the 14 Points that basically wanted open diplomacy. He wanted free trade and free movement on the seas. He wanted there to be a collective security and democracy all over the place. He wanted there to be an international peacekeeping organization that was set up. This is going to be big in a minute. Now, a lot of this was pretty well received by a lot of world leaders. It wasn't as well received by our allies. The Allied leaders didn't really love it as much. They wanted one thing. They wanted to punish Germany. They wanted to punish them for starting the war. They wanted them to pay for all the damage they did in Europe. And as they're negotiating this peace treaty, they absolutely give Germany a very bad deal. They punish them severely. They make them pay for reparations for damages, make them admit to starting the war. They make Germany basically dismantle their armed forces to basically nothing. And they give a lot of land back, for sure. So they lose a lot of land. Okay, this is a kind of a big deal. Now, the fact of the matter is, Germany wasn't really invited to the conference where they figure out the peace treaty, and the Treaty of Versailles is kind of created, and it does not leave a very good taste in the mouths of Germans. This is directly related to the start of World War II, because Germany really never gets over it. Germany never really regains their footing economically. Like they're right out of from World War I through like the Great Depression and up into World War II, they're struggling economically. A lot of people are unemployed. They're struggling to pay back other countries. They know they're just kind of because they don't have a military, they can't really fight back. So there's a lot of bitterness in Germany, which is directly results in World War II. So this kind of bad treaty definitely leads to World War II. I'm sorry, for sure. Okay, now here's the problem for the United States. During the Treaty of Versailles, Woodrow Wilson brings a group of people. He did the bulk of the negotiating. Now, Woodrow Wilson is a Democrat. He does not bring any Republicans from the Senate. The Senate's job in the U.S. government in regards to treaties is once the president signs a treaty, negotiates a treaty, signs it, it has to be brought back to the United States, and our U.S. Senate has to ratify that treaty. So the Republicans led the Senate. They were the majority party in the Senate. Woodrow Wilson does not consult any Republicans, doesn't bring them over to the negotiating tables, and they feel very left out. And there's some bitterness that's going to kind of reside with the Republicans, for sure. Now, Woodrow Wilson has a lot of acclaim in Europe as like the savior, like it came over there and it bailed you out. And that kind of goes to his head probably a little bit. Like I said, his 14 points are very well received. That kind of plays out. All right, as we go home, as we go home, let me kind of move this back here. As we go home, Woodrow Wilson has a couple big problems. First one, like I mentioned, is Republicans were not included in this negotiation. The second one is Woodrow Wilson will not compromise. The Treaty of Versailles includes what's called the League of Nations, which is an international peacekeeping organization. And that's really what he wants. That was his big part of the treaty. He gives in to a lot of other Allied leaders about punishing Germany, and a lot of other Allied leaders get territory. What Woodrow Wilson really wanted was this idea of the League of Nations, and he gets that. So as he comes home, the Senate Republicans do not like, he's not well received. As he brings the treaty into the U.S. Senate, he's met at the door by some of the Senate Republicans and like, we'll take it from here, Mr. President. He's like, no, I'm bringing it the whole way. So again, a little bit of a slap in the face. He doesn't negotiate, and because of that, this is, there's going to be a battle in the Senate to ratify this. So Woodrow Wilson does something that he's pretty good at. Like, he's going to sell the American people. Like, let's pressure the Senate into absolutely having to accept this. So he goes on this sweeping U.S. tour where he gives all these great speeches to really push and sell the treaty, how we have to ratify it, and the League of Nations is going to keep any kind of world war from ever happening again. As he goes on to this big tour, he basically has a stroke. And now this is a little bit of rumor, but a lot of people think that from this point on, Woodrow Wilson is really no longer our president. It's really his wife, Edith Wilson, that makes a lot of the decisions and really acts as the president for the rest of his tenure in office. Again, that's not really confirmed by anybody, but that seems to be kind of the popular opinion. So the other thing that really hurts him in ratifying this treaty, besides this, the Republicans, besides they won't compromise, is his health takes this terrible turn, and he's really no longer able to negotiate. He's kind of out of commission for the rest of his term. Because of this, the Treaty of Versailles was never ratified by the United States of America. The League of Nations is created, but the U.S. never joins, which is extremely embarrassing to Woodrow Wilson. And we end up having to negotiate our own peace treaty with Germany, never signing the Treaty of Versailles. It's never ratified. So that's a little bit of an embarrassment for Woodrow Wilson, and a good lesson for future politicians that it is essential to compromise. If you don't compromise, oftentimes you get nothing of what you wanted. So this is kind of the end of the saga of World War I. Like I said, this directly leads into World War II. This need to punish Germany, this need to make them pay, make them give up territory, and strip down their military is going to lead us into World